Chapter 7, First Year, Marauders. Wednesday, 15th September 1971. The next morning, Sirius leapt out of bed, heart pounding in his chest. He could hardly wait to see the results of their work. James seemed to feel the same way. He was already awake, shaking Peter and crowing, "Rise and shine!" Sirius followed suit, throwing open the curtains on Remus's bed. The skinny boy groaned when the sunlight flooded across his face. Despite their friends' protests, James and Sirius ensured that they were some of the first students into the great hall for breakfast. The Gryffindor table was completely empty, as were Hufflepuff and Slytherin. There were a few older Ravenclaw students hunched over their books. "Perfect," Sirius declared, thrilled with the empty benches. "Front row seats." "Bet no one shows up for hours," Peter whinged, looking like he was about to pass out into his porridge bowl. "Oh, cheer up." James poured them all large mugs of tea. "Don't want to see the fruits of our labor?" "Not at 6 in the morning," grumbled Peter, slurping his tea loudly. Sirius winced at the sound and pushed a plate towards him. "Have some toast and stop whinging." Remus, who always seemed to perk up when presented with food, was already cutting a slice of toast into 4 pieces. Sirius watched as he layered a different spread onto each quarter: marmalade, jam, butter, and lemon curd. He raised a brow, bemused, when Remus caught his eye, but the other boy just smiled benignly and tucked into his breakfast. Contrary to Peter's claim, it didn't take long for all of the other students to begin trickling in for breakfast. Remus had just finished scarfing down his toast when a group of Slytherins arrived, 3 boys and 2 girls, 3rd years. The 4 Gryffindors watched intently as they made their way to the table, sitting down and reaching out for platters of food. Sirius felt as though he might burst with anticipation. They waited, but nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. The Slytherins poured themselves tea, buttered toast, and spooned eggs onto their plates without any difficulty. Sirius sighed, disappointed, and wondered if Remus had been wrong about the rosehip seeds. But then the tallest boy shifted in his seat, rubbing his arm. His friend bent down, furiously scratching his leg, whilst trying to act as if he were looking for something in his pocket. The 3rd boy kept sticking his wand behind his ear to itch. "It worked!" James whispered, excitement barely restrained in his hushed voice. Even Peter was smiling now, still blinking sleep from his eyes. As the morning wore on, more and more Slytherins filtered in, and their problem quickly became obvious to anyone watching. By 7 o'clock, the Slytherin table was full of squirming, writhing, scratching boys and horrified girls looking on in dismay. It was completely hilarious. Across the room, watching students snickered and pointed at the scratching Slytherins. One nasty-looking 6th year, Amicus Caro, ripped his robes, school jumper, and tie clean off to claw at his chest, already bright red from the boys' ministrations. By the time Snape came in, Sirius thought he might die of laughter. Poor Severus appeared to have a particularly bad reaction to the rosehip seeds. He skulked in with his head bowed, trying to cover his face with his hair. How did he manage to get it that greasy? It didn't work. His nose stuck out, and it was visibly shiny and red. "Oh, Merlin!" Sirius couldn't breathe. His stomach hurt from laughing so hard. "Tell me we got his face!" "Oi, Snivelus!" James shouted suddenly, grinning mischievously at Sirius. Snape spun around, looking up, his hair parted. The left side of his face was covered in an angry red rash from his temples all the way down to his neck, disappearing under his uniform. His left eye was red too, the lid swollen and irritated. "Looking good," Sirius crowed, and all 4 boys dissolved into giggles as Snape stormed out of the room. Sirius felt like a legend by the time breakfast was over. The entire castle was already buzzing with rumors as everyone tried to figure out what had happened to the Slytherin boys. As he listened to the other students whisper about their handiwork, Sirius couldn't stop smiling. James seemed to feel the same way. He kept nudging Sirius playfully, and even Peter had cheered up. Although he insisted on continuing to remind them that he had helped too, not even Peter's obvious and annoying desperation for James's approval could bring down Sirius's mood. It was all Lupin's idea, though, Sirius said, after Peter reminded them for the 100th time that he had been the lookout. What shall we do to celebrate, eh? Exploding snap? Raid the kitchens? Remus smiled politely, appearing much less excited than the other boys. It was strange. He'd seemed completely absorbed in the prank the previous night, and Sirius had thought that Lupin was the coolest bloody person in the world when he'd gone into the room of the sleeping Slytherins by himself. He still remembered that mischievous spark in Remus's eyes. Where had it gone today? Well, whatever you do, you're doing it without me, he said. I've got double detention. From Slughorn? Yeah, and McGonagall. And Flitwick, but that's tomorrow. Then my herbology detention's over the weekend. Bloody hell, mate. James looked a bit concerned. You going for a record or something? Remus shrugged, looking away. More and more Sirius had noticed this happening. It seemed as though Remus communicated with the rest of them through layers. On a good day, he always felt at least slightly removed, as though he was speaking to them through a screen. Sometimes, like last night, there were moments when it felt like the barrier had dropped, leading to a heady rush of unguarded friendship. Other times Lupin shut them out completely, going silent or avoiding them as he had for that first week. Usually that happened after one of Peter's stupid questions, but sometimes it was unpredictable. Remus was like a puzzle that Sirius couldn't quite find all the pieces for yet. Still, he did his best to reach out, saying gently, "Maybe you'd better start doing your homework." This was apparently the wrong thing to say, as Remus only rolled his eyes and stood. "Come on," he said. "It's Defense Against the Dark Arts first. Thought you two loved that." Reg. Narcissa told me about Mum confiscating the owl. Sorry about that. Don't know what they're expecting it to do. It's not like writing letters will change my house. And it's not really fair of them, because it's not as if I've got a choice in the matter. The hat wasn't exactly taking requests. Anyway, I'm borrowing James's owl to send you this. He says hi, and he's excited to meet you next year. I think you'll really like it here. The classes aren't too bad, and there's loads to do. You won't believe some of the stuff we've been up to. I'll tell you all about it at Christmas. How are things back there? Are you doing all right? Write back using James's owl. It should stick around for a bit. Just call. Her name's Hattie. Don't worry, I made fun of James. He's the one who named her. Your brother, Sirius. Once they were done with classes, and Remus had left for detentions, and Peter had left to check out some chess club, Sirius walked to the owlry with James. He'd been embarrassed at first, asking to borrow the owl. No one else seemed to give much thought to the fact that his parents had confiscated his, but it still made Sirius flush with shame. After 2 weeks of classes, though, he couldn't ignore the guilt he felt thinking about how he'd promised Reg that he'd write. He'd finally worked up the courage to ask James the previous night, when they were all riding the high of their successful prank. After the others had gone to sleep, he had snuck over to James's bed. The other boy was still awake when Sirius pulled the curtains back. Sirius? Hi. What's going on, mate? I sort of had something to ask you. James smiled groggily, sitting up and sweeping his arms out in a grand gesture of welcome. Please, good sir, do come in. Sirius smiled in relief, clambering in next to James and sitting on his knees on top of the blanket. The curtains fell shut, creating a barrier from the rest of the room. It made Sirius feel cozy, safe. So? James said expectantly once Sirius was settled. What is it? Have you already got a plan for our next mission? He was grinning, eyes eager, and Sirius felt the familiar flush of shame that came with knowing he was about to disappoint someone. No, sorry. I was going to ask if I could borrow your owl. James blinked. Oh, yeah, sure, mate. Thanks, Sirius said, and there was an awkward pause. Unable to stomach the silence, he continued speaking. The words jumped off his lips, almost of their own accord. It's just, I promised Regulus, my brother, I promised him I'd write. And well, obviously I haven't been able to, and I figure I should check in, just make sure he's okay. Yeah, of course. James nodded, brow creased, and Sirius realized he'd been speaking quite quickly. "You can borrow my owl any time. What's mine is yours." Sirius nodded. "Okay." His throat felt a bit tight. "Okay. Yeah, cheers, mate. Thanks." He clambered out of James's bed. The other boy lay back down, yawning as he mumbled, "Any time." As they walked to the owlery together, Sirius was uncharacteristically quiet, fidgeting with the letter in his hands. James didn't mention it, instead chattering on about the spell they were learning in defense against the dark arts. It wasn't until Hattie, Sirius had snorted with laughter when James first told him the owl's name, had flown off and they were on their way back to the dorm that James paused, laying a hand gently on Sirius's arm. "Hey." His voice was low, furtive, even though they were alone in the hallway. "Are you all right?" Sirius realized that he'd been continuing to fidget with his fingers as they walked, and he clearly missed responding to some questions James had asked. He dropped his hands to his sides, flipping his hair out of his face and plastering on a smile. "Who, me? Peachy, thanks for asking." James frowned, but didn't push him on it. They walked the rest of the way to the Gryffindor common room in silence, and when Peter got back from his club and distracted James by challenging him to a game of chess, Sirius was privately relieved. It wasn't that he didn't trust James. In fact, it was quite the opposite. James was too easy to talk to, and more often than not, Sirius felt himself on the verge of breaking down and telling him everything. Every dark family secret he'd kept for years, every detail about his worries when it came to Reg, all the twisted emotions regarding his sorting. He didn't want to overwhelm or burden his new friend, or scare James away by telling him all about his mental family. At the same time, Sirius had never had anyone to talk to the way he talked to James, and it was incredibly tempting sometimes to just blurt out everything he was thinking. Sirius wasn't good at bottling things up. He was much better at releasing his emotions, often in the form of impulsive decisions that got him in trouble later. And although James shared Sirius's love of adventure and mischief, he was much more patient and an excellent listener. How else could he have been friends with Peter for so many years? Sirius's brain hurt from thinking himself in circles, and he eventually put on one of his records to drown out his thoughts. When Peter complained about the noise, he sighed dramatically and fetched the headphones that Andromeda had sent him for his last birthday. He was still lounging on the couch in the common room when Remus returned, sitting next to him. Sirius pulled off the headphones at once. "That was quick." "Only had to do one in the end," Remus replied. "Slughorn let me off, too busy trying to sort out the itching powder thing." Sirius relaxed back into the couch, smiling and folding his arms under his head. "That prank is just the gift that keeps on giving." "Snape was allergic and everything," Remus smirked mischievously. "That ginger girl said he's been in the hospital wing all day." Sirius laughed, grinning at Remus, who grinned back. It was the same smile from the train, the one that tugged across his entire face and lit it up. "Which ginger girl?" James asked quickly, looking up. "Checkmate!" Peter cried. "You know, the annoying one. Evans." "I don't think she's annoying." "Okay." Remus's smile had dropped, and he shrugged. "Let's not talk about girls," Sirius said pointedly, trying to get them back on track. "This might be the most important day of our lives. This is the day we became legends, the day our friendship was forged in the fire of itching powder." "They don't know it was us, do they?" Peter asked nervously. "He just had to ruin everything." Remus shook his head. "Slughorn reckons it was a Slytherin girl, or a gang of Marauders." The word struck Sirius like a bolt of lightning. It was so perfect. "Marauders!" he repeated. "That's it! Raise your glasses, boys." James shot him a bemused smile. "We don't have glasses." "Well, just pretend." Sirius shook his head irritably, but he was still smiling too. "From this day forward, we are the Marauders." He savoured the way the word rolled off his tongue, elegant and playful and mysterious. The other boys stared at him for a moment, silent. James was still grinning, and Peter kept darting glances at James as if waiting for a cue on the proper response. Next to him, Remus burst out laughing. "What sort of Ponzi gang name is that?" He had never heard Remus laugh before, really laugh, like he couldn't help himself, breathless and joyful. It made Sirius laugh too, and even after they had calmed down, he found that he couldn't stop smiling.